brains. And I'm going to use this analogy of mise en place, which is from the culinary world. I'm a foodie type of guy, so hopefully this sticks. So last night, none of you guys thought about the kitchen as we walked into the main dining room, right? But if you did look in, you would have seen all the chefs banging their pots and pans, fires on the stove, and everything was running, and we didn't really care about it because the food just showed up. But the discipline that made our meal so good was invisible to us, right? But all the salmon came out consistently excellent, all the beef was perfectly cooked, the salads all looked beautiful, and that's because there's a system in place in the kitchen. And so the reason for that is this concept called mise en place, which means setup. And so for the sake of today's conversation, I want to talk about the two main parts of that, which are safety and systems, okay? Now, throughout this whole presentation, the mise en place idea is the company brain, and a lot of you guys already have a company brain running of sorts. It's just all locked in people's heads. And now with AI, we can make that system be leveraged through the technology. So my name is Grant. I teach and implement AI, and I put AI in quotes because that means a ton of things, right? If you talk to some people, they're still figuring out what skills are, and that's totally fine. I do a lot of teaching on how to build skills and how to think about roles and tasks, and that's a very good and healthy place to be. And you also have people like Tori who are working with Anthropic directly, and that's also another level of the game, right? So with my presentation today, some of this might be over your head, it might be where you already are. My goal is just to get everyone to somewhat of a level playing field, because we've gone from skills and making Claude or AI a single player game now to a multiplayer game. So the agencies in the next 2 years that are going to win are not going to be the ones that have the best AI. They're going to be the ones that stop forgetting. And for the sake of today's argument, I'm going to tell you that you're not a service business, even though we all do customer service. Of course, we put out fires, we say things to make people feel good, but you're actually a knowledge business that is constantly forgetting things. And so there are two main assets in any agency, and I also know that we have brands here today. Some of this stuff will still be relevant to you, I promise, but I'm going to stick with the agency side because that's what I know really well. The main asset is your people, right? They're the ones that get on calls, they're the ones that maintain relationships, and the relationships are what ultimately keep our brands and our agencies alive. But number two is everything that they know. It's every call they're on, it's every thread they write, it's every deck they make. And it's gone the moment it's made. And the reason I say it's gone is because how many people made a Q1 strategy deck for your brand or the brands you work with? How many of those were opened in Q1? How many of those were opened in Q2? Probably none. So when I say that it's made and it's gone, it's because we make these things, we satisfy demand, and then we move forward, and a lot of those things don't come back. But asset two is essentially what allows us to compound and make our business more repeatable. And so our most valuable inventory that we all own is also the most dangerous because that mise en place is rotting. So this amnesia is the enemy of your business and of your brand. And so we want to think about how can we use these assets when they're created again and again and again. If your best thinking is dying in those threads that nobody reopens, then it's the people who are largely in this room that become the central node of the business. They're the ones that remember the 16th message in a Slack thread back from February, and only by the grace of God do they remember that to make something useful out of it. And that's a cage that ultimately keeps everyone in this room trapped. And that's what we want to get everyone out of. We want the information to move beyond just their brain and what they're able to remember on a whim. And so this is a direct quote from someone I talked to on Tuesday. This is one of our clients. I can't tell you what my team actually delivered. They have 8 people on their team. They're working with 20 brands. That's pretty terrifying when you're at the end of the month, right? And the typical agency journey is that a client is going to maybe redirect us in month 2, and they say, you know what, we're actually low on stock in this product. Let's push it till after July 4th. Let's focus on something else over here. Then 4 months later, they ask for where that thing was that you promised them in the statement of work, and you have to absorb that blame because there's no proof point, or you're going to spend half an hour, 2 hours going back into the manual knowledge system, the Slack threads, the ClickUp comments, your email, your transcripts, to try to find something and save face. I've seen this, I've lived this, so I know this is how it happens. Now, it's 4 days until the end of the month, and if you are both brand and agency side, if you were to go to your project management system right now, just looking at that board, beautiful Kanban, do you know what shipped this month? Do you know what slipped and why? No, you probably can't. Because I've worked with enough agencies to know that this is just not common. Most people don't have it all organized. And so what do we do instead now that we have AI? Of course, we're just going to pool it. We're going to put it into one big old company brain. We're going to send all that data into a data lake or whatever you want to call it, but we're going to put our call transcripts in there. We're going to put all of our threads. We're going to back up Slack. Maybe we even upgrade our Slack to get that extra API. And you put all that information into one place because we know that Claude can remember things for us. Which is kind of like in a kitchen where you have one station for every client and all the different assets are on the same cutting boards and everything is all mixed together. It's separate, but it's kind of mixed together. And what that leads to is contamination. And when we have contamination, we have a lot of risk, which could also be legal, it could be reputational, and most importantly, it's trust and relationship risk. So for an agency, that pooled information without any guardrails, just loading it up and letting Claude or Gemini or whichever tool you're using work is a loaded gun. Because when we put all of these places, all these clients in one place, a lot of times we're working with brands that are competing with each other, or they're just similar enough where you can get some bleed. And not very many normal companies are going to be combining a lot of different angles and hooks together with each other, but we do as agencies. And so if the brain is going to serve client A's hook to client B, we end up opening ourselves up to a ton of risk, right? It can surface that winning hook from one brand to another. It's called a clean suggestion. And then we completely are erasing the lines between our brands. And this is significantly worse than a false positive because there's no culprit. There's no flag, there's no human, there's no throat to choke, right? This is what a brand is going to look like or look to you for when they catch it. And so this is probably the first flag, which is to say we have to be really careful about the way that we store information. And I also want to point out on the false positive side of things, there was a research study done on Opus 4.6. When it came out, there was a 16% false positive rate, or where it was saying something that it thought was correct, and it wasn't. Months after Opus 4.6 was released, that number went up to 33%. Ouch. So think about that with all the models, right? All the people who are using these things the same way you are, you're loading it up with context, and it's making assumptions, and sometimes you're like, yeah, I'm going to read 75% of this, and it's going to be just fine. But if you don't trust, but you have to trust but verify. If you don't verify, you can run risk. And so if you're in a regulated industry and something gets swapped over between brands, now you have legal risk. Shane and I were just talking about how there are lawyers that have lost their licenses. They've been disbarred. Debarred? They've been disbarred, whatever. Because of stuff like this where they're just letting things go. So everyone in this room buys the same AI. We have access to the same models. We have access to the same tools. It's kind of like having the same oven in a kitchen. But you obviously know that the oven is not the moat, right? We can all have access to the same tools we buy off the shelf. That's not what makes our brands and our agencies special. It's the mise en place that gives you your special sauce. It's what makes you special at the end of the day. And so tying this all together, when we think about our safety in our systems, we have to be really intentional about how we go from a kitchen that's operated by a bunch of people to a kitchen that's operated by AI or AI assisted, right? Trust but verify. So for the sake of today, I really want to point out two things that we've learned over the course of building out these systems for other companies. One is to have clean stations, and one is the idea of overnight prep, okay? So clean stations are the idea that we keep all of our different clients separate, they never touch one another, and that's how we store the information. Instead of doing one big pool, we're very intentional about where the stations are located, what gets put on the cutting boards. Meats and vegetables don't go on the same board, right? And the overnight prep is that every time we close down our laptops for the day, we want to come back to a kitchen that's locked and loaded. All the carrots are cooked, we're ready, the meat's already been butchered, we're ready to go. Nothing's from scratch. That's the ideal world. So thinking about clean stations, there are 3 categories here. Every person needs to have access that is credentialed to where they are in the business, both their rank and the different clients that they work on. So we have to think, if you're a brand and you want to have your designers have access to everything you're working on, that's fine, but does the designer need to have access to financial data? Probably not, right? That's someone else's job. So it extends to inside of a certain company. If you just are centralizing your brand's information, we have to be really intentional about who can access what. If your salaries are in here across any business, you wouldn't want that shared with everyone. But it can come out if we're not intentional, right? So being really clear about each person's scope to different clients or just raw data inside of the company. Number 2 is channels. So we want to make sure that we are containing information in very intentional ways. This goes back to the giant pool. We need to containerize different clients in different buckets. And the way you do that has to, again, be intentional. It's the way that AI reaches into the cookie jar to pick out the information and how many cookie jars you have and what are the walls between those different areas of cookies. And then lastly is the bots. So the bot needs to be treated as a team member in the exact same way as the first column. It should not have all access and be all-knowing. It needs to be credentialed into each individual area because that bleed is the risk to our business. And I think, Satya Nadella had a tweet about a week or 2 ago where he said there's human capital and there's token capital. That's kind of where we're going. The human capital is the relationships that we have. It's our knowledge. It's the very beginning. It's asset number 2. It's the way that we think and the way that we process, but ultimately it's relationships with our customers and our clients. So it's really important that everyone knows that the risk here, yes, it could be an ad going out, but as we move forward, it's our relationships and the way that we treat our clients that's going to be the stickiness. That's why so many agencies grow off of referrals. So this whole conversation should really be logged in your brain of how can I protect my relationships with my clients? And this is not to say that we can get rid of bad habits or we can be okay with bad habits. We still need good habits. We need to make sure that our systems of record are updated. So our expression is, if it doesn't happen in ClickUp, it doesn't exist. That's because we need to have very clearly labeled data as well as unstructured. Slack and transcripts are unstructured. ClickUp or project management and HubSpot is labeled data. The likelihood of AI to hallucinate on labeled data is much lower because it says company name and then there's the value. There's GrantBot. It says start date and then there's a date field. It's very hard to mess that up. But if you're pulling from transcripts, if there's 3 dates in there, it's much easier, right? So I'm not giving anyone a pass. Your team still needs to use the boring tools the way that they always were supposed to, and most likely aren't. So little reminder. And just to really hammer in on this bot being a team member, you would not give any one team member, except for maybe your COO or someone else in the C-suite, access to every single thing in the company, right? So don't give it the master key like a janitor in a building, right? You need to make sure that you're intentional about this because information leaking out also can ruin trust between teammates. So this existential risk of information access is really a big piece of company brains, and that's why I'm harping on it so much. We need to make sure that we're intentional about how that data is stored. So once you can solve that, the runway is clear to do a lot more fun things, and that is the midnight prep. And I think about this a lot because this is the meta game of AI. Every night you can have the kitchen preparing itself for the next day. And there are really 3 main pieces of unstructured text or data that I think are relevant for everyone here. One is Slack, or wherever you communicate with your team. So Slack, Teams, also your Asana comments, your ClickUp comments, all that stuff is team communication, super helpful. Number 2 is our transcripts, whether those are with your team or in the external world. You want to make sure that those are logged, and you put in place rules around attendees and naming conventions so that one call about billing does not go to the rest of the team, or a one-on-one with one of your employees can't get shared everywhere else. So you want to make sure you're really intentional about transcripts. And then once we combine those with our mystery number 3, we can get leverage. And number 3 is actually the way that the team uses the company brain. Okay. So what this means is, like, when we're in a conversation, we're going to ask questions to each other. We're going to answer questions from each other. And that transcript has a lot of really good information in it. But if you're going to go through and make a creative brief and you're using the company brain for that, and you go through 15 turns or different back and forth conversations, the way that you go back and forth and give that feedback is a process that AI can learn from. But if it happens that one time, it's just like the asset it's made and then it's gone. But AI doesn't have to forget that. So when you combine the Slack, the transcripts, and your transcripts with AI, you can start building processes and skills that it can cook on and improve overnight. It's like the kitchen is building new recipes to decrease the amount of time it takes to make the next meal. So you can see that you have a team asking questions to the company brain. It's thinking, it's processing, it's mapping out a solution, but then overnight it's filling in the gaps so that the next time you ask for another creative brief, instead of 15 terms, it takes 5. And again, we're using the information in these conversations. We're pulling back that Q1 strategy document. We're pulling back that call where they talked about their goals. We're storing this information in a way that it's accessible. And it can also go and update the system of record, like our CRM and our project management tools. So you can think about, a totally chaotic, unstructured kitchen, a company that's got fire drills all the time in the before. Afterwards, your board is updated, your CRM is accurate because the system is self-improving. And when I spoke in Portugal, it was all about how we make our individual usage of AI self-improving. Now we're thinking more about company level, because intelligence is solved in a way. Like Fable 5 got released, it got taken back, bummer. But at the end of the day, the tools are already good enough to do most of what we need. I don't know very many people that are really at the bleeding edge unless they're in software. So your agency has all the intelligence it needs. It's just how we structure the context and the questions to get what we want from it. And then it fills back in on itself. And so the next time you go for a brief, you might be Mondays and you want to have a new brief for your client, you can just load in a schedule that's going to pull from the latest data. Because it's self-improving, that next time it's going to pull from the failures, it's going to have the brand voice, it's going to have the call that you forgot. All that information is already there. And so that creates more consistent deliverables every time. It has the same headcount in your company, but with more output, more throughput. And this is an important one to stop on, because a lot of people that we talk to at the individual contributor level are worried that AI is a subtraction tool. It's going to remove people from companies. But what do we see? It's actually multiplying the need for people in companies, because we have this strategy in the creative design and we know what good quality is. And to hammer this point home, software engineers with a #1 job being disrupted by AI. AI can write all the code. What do we see? There's a dip in the number of job requisitions or number of job postings for software engineers. And then months later, it skyrockets because anyone can make code. Very similar situation here. We can handle more brands with the same team because we're just doing the strategy, the creative design, and the quality assurance. And most importantly, the relationships. So this creates your best day by default. You have unified quality across your team, across your people. You have your senior people, your junior people. Everyone is able to produce at your quality standard without needing to go through a bunch of revision cycles. The training is obviously still important, but you have a junior person punching like a senior. That's possible now with this consistency. We also have early warning for churn. I think it was yesterday that so Brian and I were talking about the ability for Gemini to do facial recognition and body language. You can do that. You can have AI read or watch your videos and tell you when people are upset with you, when they say, yeah, the creative's great. It's like, that sounds in a transcript, the creative's great. But when you hear it and you see it, they're pissed. Gemini can do that now. So your awareness of what's possible is also a really big part of using AI. And lastly is the economics. Obviously, if we can do more, we can have more throughput with the same headcount, our margins get better, everybody's happy. So excellence stops being a heroic thing because we're able to have that consistency. We know it's predictable. and you can picture a kitchen where everything is just flowing through in harmony. That's what we want for our agencies. And I run a service business. I know that not every day is going to look like this and feel like this. There's always going to be fires, but if we can reduce the number of fires and the number of abnormalities, that obviously helps us. And we can also produce things to solve for fires much faster at the quality, even under pressure. And that also lets the founder finally walk away from the line cook, be more strategic, making more strategic bets. And that's ultimately what we want for every founder and leader at a company. So this is not all theory. These things are being built. You have different tools like Hermes. You have tools like NanoClaw. The frameworks exist. It's the way that we actually go in and set them up and be intentional about that. And so whether you're the one that builds it or you have someone else build it, the question that I pose to you is measure twice, cut once, right? Be really intentional about the setup, the systems, because that's what's going to allow this thing to scale without a big fire on your reputation. Oh, oops, formatting. Anyway, I had this brief. This brief gets made every day for me on demand if I want it refreshed, but this system is pulling from all the other parts of my business. You can see that I have open pipeline from HubSpot. I have things that are waiting for me in Slack threads, my calendar, my ledger is Mercury. I also choose tools that have APIs because I can pull from them now. So to have all my banking information in my main one-pager is extremely helpful for me. So know that as you go into the different tools you're choosing, the ability to have an API or an MCP also is much more important now, at least in my book. So looking at the future, having a system like this, a system that self-improves, a system that is very intentional about who has access to what, is going to feel like table stakes in a few years. I would say that the company game is very much an unsolved problem at scale. There are a lot of companies that are trying to build these company brains. If you pay attention to Y Combinator, the startup accelerator, they have one of their requests for startups is on company brains. But it's my opinion, and I share with my team, that these things are so nuanced to how your team works and the permissions. It's not black and white. It's not something that can really be done at scale. So we see this as being mostly a service. And obviously you have YC also asking for service as a software. The service side of getting it right to your company and your people and their expectations is really important. So again, measure twice, cut once, and be intentional. You didn't have to look at the kitchen last night, and that's the goal. That's what you want your clients to feel like. That's what you want your customers to feel like. So just know that if you set up your kitchen the right way, you can have that free-flowing delivery mechanism. And that's what we should all be striving for with AI now. That's all I got. Thank you very much, Grant. Does anybody have any questions on that? Yes, sir.
So do the technical organization, generally it's like we have one, but multiple organizations. The few issues that we've been running into that I'm curious to hear, you see play out in the organization is different level of adoption from the people is one sort of problem that I'm trying to figure out. We have different levels of do we training the team. There's different things, and that could just be the balance between R&D versus that develop skills or whatever workflows versus their day-to-day activity. But that's one thing that you're seeing evolve over time with government. So maybe curious about what on that, and he was out there.
Sure. Yeah. So we see AI adoption like lungs expanding and contracting, like breathing. So you want everyone to know, oh my gosh, this is possible. I'm going to go try that. And then they contract and we get rid of all the bad token usage. Because a lot of companies, like you've got people we've seen that are doing their meal planning on their company account and they're on an enterprise plan and they've just spent 1,000 tokens because they're using nonsense uses of AI. So you want to expand and contract and make them curious. And the really big part of adoption is the psychology of it. So we shoot for a quick win. The quick win builds a story that we can then share. The story drives curiosity, exploration, exploration to the next win. And so if you can turn that loop with as many people as possible, that helps. And at some point, you want to go and sit down. If someone's really slow, is that you sit down with them and you say, show me how you work. And this is kind of how our whole business is based, is like, I want to see you go through the process of competitor research. And I just watch them open tabs and what are they reading? What are they picking out? Why is that line interesting? And then we help show them how to build a skill show them how to build something repeatable that they can then use on their own. And I think that skills are really still the building block of AI. Everyone needs to know how to build a very solid, useful skill.